Picture this. The year is 1347. Dawn breaks over a field that will soon be soaked in blood, mud, and the broken dreams of 1,000 men. You're a medieval peasant, let's call you William, and 3 days ago you were peacefully tending sheep. Now you're clutching a rusty spear with trembling hands, surrounded by the stench of fear and unwashed bodies. The enemy charges toward you, screaming like demons from hell itself, and then you immediately soil yourself, drop your weapon, and run away, crying for your mother. Welcome to actual medieval warfare, where heroes were mythical creatures, hygiene was a luxury reserved for the afterlife, and most epic battles ended with everyone desperately wishing they'd stayed home to milk cows and pretend the outside world didn't exist. Hollywood has been feeding you beautiful lies about medieval battles for decades, crafting romantic fantasies that would make actual medieval warriors laugh themselves into an early grave. Those perfectly choreographed sword fights, where heroes dance gracefully through combat, that noble hand-to-hand combat, where honor trumps survival, knights gallantly charging into glorious death while angelic choirs sing in the background. Yeah, none of that happened. Ever. Not once. Today we're diving into the blood-soaked, terror-filled reality of what really went down when medieval armies clashed. And spoiler alert, it was simultaneously more pathetic, more terrifying, and somehow infinitely more fascinating than anything Hollywood has ever dared to show you. First, let's destroy some myths. Medieval battles weren't massive. Hours-long affairs with thousands of warriors gracefully dancing around with swords. Most battles lasted about 20 to 30 minutes max, roughly a coffee break. Why so short? Because medieval soldiers were mostly farmers, handed pointy sticks and told to go get 'em, champ. These weren't professional warriors. They were Bob the blacksmith and Harold the goat herder, both desperately wanting to be anywhere else. Here's the kicker. Most medieval battles were decided before anyone threw a punch. Armies would march around, stare menacingly, maybe shout insults about each other's mothers, and then negotiate. They'd literally just talk it out like adults. When diplomacy failed and the dogs of war were unleashed, the real psychological warfare began, a terrifying spectacle that would make modern horror directors weep with envy. Armies engaged in what historians politely call pre-battle intimidation tactics, which is academic speak for trying to scare the living soul out of each other, using every nightmare-inducing trick in the book. Picture this hellish scene. Warriors banged weapons against shields in thunderous, rhythmic cacophony that could shatter nerves from miles away. The sound alone was enough to make grown men question their life choices. They screamed war cries, not the heroic battle hymns Hollywood shows you, but primal, animalistic sounds, like finding a nest of venomous spiders in your bed, amplified by hundreds of men convinced they were about to die horrible deaths. Some armies brought an orchestra of terror, war horns that could wake the dead, drums that pounded like the footsteps of approaching doom, and yes, bagpipes. Medieval bagpipes weren't just music, they were acoustic torture devices designed to break enemy morale. Honestly, if someone started playing bagpipes at me during battle, I'd surrender immediately and beg for mercy. The really creative armies brought priests to publicly curse enemies. Picture a medieval cleric shouting, "May your crops wither and your livestock develop indigestion," while pointing dramatically. Ridiculous now, but back then, people genuinely believed this worked. When the talking, cursing, and musical intimidation finally reached its crescendo, actual combat erupted like a dam bursting with human violence. And here's where Hollywood commits its most spectacular sins against historical truth. Medieval battles weren't elegant sword fights. They were chaotic, desperate shoving matches with pointy objects, where death came not from skilled blade work, but from being crushed, trampled, or accidentally impaled by your own terrified allies. Most fighting happened in what's called a melee, which sounds civilized until you realize it was essentially a giant, writhing, screaming mosh pit of death, where everyone bunched together and frantically stabbed whoever was nearest. Imagine Black Friday shopping, but everyone's armed, everyone's terrified, and everyone's significantly more homicidal. The battle lines would crash together like two waves of human desperation, creating a nightmare of twisted metal, breaking bones, and the kind of screaming that would haunt survivors for the rest of their short, brutal lives. Swords? Barely used. They were expensive, required skill, and pretty useless in crowds. Real weapons were polearms, long sticks with sharp bits, spears, halberds, billhooks, anything letting you poke the other guy while staying far away. The strategy was beautifully simple. simple. Get in formation, lower your pointy sticks, charge forward screaming. If lucky, the other side would see your wall of death and just leave. If unlucky, you'd crash into their wall of death. Then it became a pushing contest, while trying not to get impaled. Knights in shining armor? They spent most battles trying not to fall off horses or get dragged down by angry peasants with farming tools. A fully armored knight who fell over was basically an expensive turtle. Lots of protection, but good luck getting up without help. Now, for what movies never show, the absolutely revolting conditions. Medieval armies were mobile disease factories. Thousands of unwashed men walking for weeks, eating questionable food, drinking sketchy water, sharing everything from lice to dysentery. By battle time, half the army was sick, the other half smelled dead. Battlefields were nightmarish. Rain, mud, blood, and bodily fluids created slippery, stinking messes. Warriors would slip and fall, then get trampled by allies. Some battles had more casualties from drowning in mud than from weapons. The smell? Chronicles describe battlefield stenches detectable from miles away. Dead horses, dead humans, human waste, vomit from terrified soldiers, and unwashed masses created an olfactory assault that could knock a buzzard off garbage. Medieval medicine was rub herbs on it and pray. Got stabbed? Hope it doesn't infect. Broken bone? Hello, lifelong disability. Brain injury? Time for a fun, new personality. The battle ends, but the horror continues. Medieval armies didn't get paychecks, they got paid by looting battlefields and countryside. This meant stripping corpses naked and fighting over who checks bodies for loose change. Cleanup fell to volunteered local peasants, spending days dragging corpses to mass graves, assuming animals and disease hadn't gotten there first. Some battlefields were still finding skeletons centuries later. Medieval commanders knew warfare was 90% psychological. Why fight when you could terrify enemies into submission? Some armies catapulted severed heads over walls, the medieval equivalent of very aggressive, strongly worded letters. The most effective weapon? Reputation. If word spread that your army didn't take prisoners, enemies often surrendered immediately, rather than discover your creative execution methods. So, there you have it. Medieval battles in all their terrifying, disgusting, utterly unheroic glory. No dramatic sword duels, no noble sacrifices, no stirring speeches, just desperate, scared people hitting each other with farm tools while knee-deep in mud, trying not to die of dysentery. Next time you watch a medieval battle movie, remember reality, mass panic, tactical shoving, and everyone's overwhelming desire to be literally anywhere else doing literally anything else. Medieval warfare wasn't about heroism or honor. It was about survival in a world where life was nasty, brutish, short, and surprisingly smelly. The real heroes weren't warriors charging fearlessly into battle. They were ones who lived long enough to go home and explain why they never wanted to do that again. And honestly, they had a point. The next time someone tells you about the good old days, remind them that medieval soldiers would trade places with a modern fast food worker in a heartbeat. At least McDonald's has health insurance and doesn't require you to fight off dysentery while someone tries to stab you with a farming implement. Want more historical reality checks that'll ruin your favorite movies? Subscribe and hit that notification bell.